This special presentation was produced in high definition by WEDU, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota.
Coming up next, Senator Marco Rubio joins the effort to repeal Obamacare. The state senator proposes reforming the way Florida votes in the Electoral College. Governor Rick Scott wants the state to create its own law enforcement squad dedicated to countering terrorism. And Florida climate scientists would like to meet with the incoming president to talk with him about the effects of climate change on the state. Political Insights next on Florida This Week.
From the WEDU studios, this is Florida This Week. And now, moderator Rob Lohrei.
Welcome back. This week our panelists are Noah Pransky is an investigative reporter for 10 News WTSP. Mark Proctor is a political consultant and a Republican. Barry Edwards is a political strategist, a radio commentator, and a Democrat. And Anastasia Dawson is a reporter for the Tampa Bay Times. So thanks for coming. Good to have you here. Well, lone shooter opened fire Friday at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, killing at least 5 and wounding 8 others before being taken into custody. Many passengers were left standing on the runways. Officials continue to search for any others involved in the shootings. This comes after Florida Governor Rick Scott wants to spend nearly $6 million tax dollars to boost the number of state agents dedicated to fighting terrorism. Sparked by last year's attack on the Pulse nightclub, in which 49 people were shot to death, Scott will ask legislators to include enough money in the upcoming annual budget to hire agents who will be stationed in 7 regions across the state. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement initially suggested hiring the 46 additional agents. The governor said he's backing the request because the state needs specialists that are solely dedicated to identifying these terrorists and stopping them. During the June rampage, the shooter, Omar Mateen, pledged allegiance to the Islamic State group while he was talking with a police negotiator on the phone. Mateen was armed with an AR-15 style assault rifle and a handgun. So, Anastasia, this idea from the governor, how does he intend it to help fight terrorism?
Well, the FDLE currently has, some agents that are doing some counterterrorism efforts, but they also deal with drug and getting rid of drugs and all sorts of things. They don't have the manpower to really plug in and communicate with others. So his idea is to direct a large portion of the state budget to these terrorism-related activities and ramp up those efforts.
And Noah, is this new territory for the state, and isn't this what the FBI already does?
The FBI often takes the lead on their task forces. What we're seeing the state do is try to ramp up their portion of it. You know, every boot on the ground is more help. I think there's nothing you can do to stop terrorism. I think this is just a way of life, but obviously everyone wants to stop every attack we can. So while the FBI does its thing with a huge amount of manpower, most of what they do on the ground here in Tampa Bay and across the state of Florida and everywhere in the country, they work with local jurisdictions. And whether that be the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, Tampa PD, some of the smaller police departments, or even FDLE, they work in conjunction with everybody. So 46 more officers could go a long way.
Okay.
And a lot of these efforts are looking at, preventing these tragedies from occurring before they happen. A lot of the work that on-the-ground resources do is reactionary. There was a bomb threat called into Jewish Community Center preschools here in Tampa yesterday, and the FBI didn't step in because TPD was there and they determined that there wasn't any threat. So this will help those local agencies that are on the front lines, get that information before, you get a bunch of preschoolers nervous about where they're going to go that day.
And Mark, what do you think about this idea of the governor's?
Well, first of all, the FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, has taken on more and more activities over the past few years. And Rick Swearingen, who's the current head, I actually know him. I work with him when I was on the governor's staff. He's a very, very bright guy. So what they're going to do is they're going to take 7 district offices, do a lot of intel, and then serve as a liaison between the federal agencies and the local agencies, and perhaps have a better, a better feel for things that are going on. Let me also add that this package, which is about $5.8 million, is in addition to another $12 million that the governor proposed to give a law enforcement raise to all law enforcement officers in Florida. So the Governor Scott is really tied into really beefing up law enforcement in Florida.
Yeah, Barry, do you think that hiring these 46 people and spending the $6 million and creating these 7 districts across the state, that's going to help fight terrorism?
Absolutely. I think that I applaud the governor for this, and luckily we were able to go to his press conference yesterday when he launched it here in Tampa. And one of my clients, Senator Rouson, talked to him about adding, it's one of the priorities, looking at like the Martin Luther King Parade coming up. We have 100,000 people at 3 events in Tampa Bay, or the NCAA National Championship. There's a lot of events that people are vulnerable, and having these people able to coordinate, like Noah was talking about, the multiple jurisdictions. Nobody's really doing that right now. Who's talking with the sheriff, making sure they're talking to the police, making sure they're talking to the FDLE and the FBI. This one group that can kind of coordinate all of that to make sure we're a little safer. $5.8 million at $80 billion budget. One crisis is worth it.
You know, there are a couple things we do need to point out. One, you mentioned the governor's press conference yesterday. He had 4 press conferences this week to announce this. So I think we want our politicians to act and not necessarily tell everyone that they need to pat them on the back for these things. 4 press conferences in a week for the same issue seems a little excessive. It's also worth pointing out that the governor probably needs to take the lead in the next few months, and we've said this year after year, in giving other important state employees a raise, because it's been 10 years now since there's been across-the-board pay raise for first responders, firefighters, probation officers, prison workers. The pay is so low at the state level that they're losing these people. The turnover and recruiting is a big issue, and that's suffering in a lot of places in the state. So these 46 jobs are great, but there are thousands that need the legislature and governor's attention.
And I echo that and it's not, and for law enforcement too, if you talk to the state attorneys, you know, an average state attorney coming out of law school with all that debt, I think makes like $41,000 or $42,000 in Tampa or St. Petersburg. The secretaries in these offices make $20,000, $25,000. So there's a massive turnover, which is not good for law enforcement. So across the board,
prison guards make in the low 30s,
and which is why we have a crisis not only for the prisoners but also for the guards, because they're underfunded, undertrained, and understaffed.
But you know, I'm wondering if these terrorist incidents that we're seeing are gun related. There's no legislation to cut back on AR-15 style rifles or anything like that in Tallahassee.
And the governor, in fact, it looks like this year, unless people write in or call their legislators, and mostly the Republican legislators need to get the calls, is Senator Stubbe looks like he's on track this year to get his open carry bill and a campus carry bill. And in campuses, just, you know, you have drugs, alcohol, and hormones, a bad scenario.
I just want to make a point that the legislature is probably the key to this, because last year, before the Orlando incident, they had a bill, it's called Andy's Law, that was an anti-terrorism bill, passed all the committees, and the Speaker never allowed it on the floor, never got a vote. So it's got to be, for this to even happen, you've got to have the legislature on board.
Okay. Well, Florida Senator Marco Rubio joined 50 other Senate Republicans this week to begin the process of dismantling the Affordable Care Act. Rubio voted for a budget resolution that paves the way for the repeal of President Obama's signature health care law, possibly as early as this coming week. Florida's other U.S. Senator, Democrat Bill Nelson, opposed the measure. During his re-election bid, Rubio called the ACA a failed law that's hurting Floridians, pointing to rising health insurance premiums and the struggle that small businesses are having with the law's confusing rules and regulations, as he put it. Repealing the ACA with its protections for people who have pre-existing conditions, protections for women, young adults, and subsidies for the working poor could have big consequences for the Sunshine State. According to the federal government, Florida led the nation in the number of people signing up for Obamacare for 2017, with 1.3 million new people signed up. More than 2.4 million Floridians would lose coverage if the law was repealed and not immediately replaced. Noah, Donald Trump has said repeal and replace. It looks like repeal may come through. They haven't come up with an idea for replacement yet.
No, and I think Democrats keep calling for that. They say, all right, what is your plan? And we haven't really heard any details. But I've also heard from Republicans in D.C. who have said, this isn't going to be blowing up Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act. Say, well, what about this provision and this provision? I think the idea from certainly a lot of responsible Republicans is to try and take a scalpel to it, make a more symbolic repeal, and not blow everything up. So I think a lot of people in Washington are trying to figure out how to do that.
Mark, I can remember seeing you at an anti-ACA rally outside meeting that Kathy Castor was
children's,
holding at
at
the
the
Children's
Children's
Board
Board,
in Tampa a few years ago. At the beginning of the height of the Tea Party movement, this is really kind of the culmination of one of the aims of the Tea Party, right?
Absolutely, and I think it's also what got Donald Trump the momentum, because here's what happened, and this is what the tragedy of this was. This was passed by the Democrats. The Republicans had no input in it. They basically said, okay, we're the majority, we're passing. I think, and so the flashback is, okay, it's our turn. You know, we've got the majority now. But I will say that I've seen a number of specific proposals, although I haven't seen a package, of keeping some of the things like the provision of
Pre-existing
conditions, but they're talking about doing block grants, and they're doing a more of a competitive system. But I don't think, this is my prediction, I don't think they're just going to abolish it and leave people, you know, unprotected.
But Mark, would you say from your vantage point right now that you would predict that deductibles are going to go down and
Yes.
that premiums are going to go down under the Republican plan?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
you think so?
I absolutely do.
Barry, what would you say to that? Deductibles
I
go
hate
down,
to
premiums
disagree
go
with
down.
my friend Mark Proctor there, but the Republicans did have input. President Obama met with Senator Grassley, the chairman of the Finance Committee, and he said, what are your objections in this bill? And Senator Grassley gave him his objections. Obama said, fine, we'll adopt them all. And then Senator Grassley said, well, we still can't vote for it. So they never wanted to support it because they wanted to hurt Obama, and they weren't serious about helping America.
It worked.
And it worked. Now, let's get to the next step. They can't abolish the whole thing. They can have these votes, but as a cynic, you would say, well, the Republicans don't think they're going to get the people on the exchanges to vote for them anyway. That's true, probably. Those are probably Democratic voters. But they do have millions and millions of Republican voters, and be aware of this, that have children that are on until they're 26. You have tens of millions around the country that have pre-existing conditions. So if the Republicans want to repeal all of this stuff, they're going to do it at their own political peril. So for your own self-interest, you need to slow down and find a replacement before you act too far.
Mark, your turn.
But I agree. I don't think it's going to be a wholesale just abolish it. I think it's, again, the key is replace.
But didn't the Senate just vote to repeal the whole thing?
They did.
In the House, they just voted to.
But I think it's going to be a transitional phase-in type of thing, because I think they're going to have to find ways. You talk to doctors. I mean, I had 4 doctors this year. My doctors keep changing. Why
So
they
we should
leave it?
listen to your leadership in the Senate and the
No, I
House
listen to
that,
my doctor.
that are saying that they're going to repeal it. So we should just ignore what the Republicans.
Allow me to take one quick step back from the politics of this. Obamacare did some good things. It did some bad things. It picked winners and losers. And whether you were a winner or loser will probably dictate how you feel about this law. Abolishing it, or parts of it, will create more winners and losers. That will probably be the political fallout we see from here. But it's also worth noting that the price of health care has gone up for 20-something years in a row. Obamacare gave the impression it would curb that. It didn't, and that was its biggest failure, was perception.
That and the fact that keep your plan if you like your plan.
Perceptive losses.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anyone really believed it was going to stop the rising cost of health care.
Disguises that we have 1 million people that are working poor, that my Republican colleagues tell me they always talk about, the working poor that we haven't expanded Medicaid for, so they don't have, so they're working out there and they still don't have health care, so they get sick, so they can't work and they lose their homes.
Programs like Hillsborough County has the Indigent Health Care Plan, which takes care of the working poor, which was voted on by the people
And what
here.
does Tampa General have? $80 million in unmandated.
All right. Well, in the wake of Donald Trump's winning the presidency while losing the popular vote by more than 2.8 million, incoming state Senator Darrell Roussant is filing legislation to include Florida in the national movement to elect the president by a popular vote. It's known as the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. The goal is to eliminate the Electoral College's ultimate role in presidential elections, but it would not require amending the U.S. Constitution. This will be the 4th time the bill has been introduced in Tallahassee. All previous attempts failed. The bill would require the state's presidential electors to vote for the winner of the national popular vote, but it would take effect only if and when enough states sign on, representing a majority or 270 Electoral College votes. So far, according to the National Popular Vote website, 11 states, totaling 165 electoral votes, have passed the bill. California, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, Vermont, Washington, and the District of Columbia. So, Mark, you like this idea?
Yeah. With all due respect to Barry's client, I think this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I'll give you a couple reasons, and then I know you got your book there, but okay. Electoral College has been in existence. It was the in Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, and the 12th Amendment also dealt with that. So for years and years, we've had this system. Bill Clinton got elected twice. Obama got elected twice. the system works. Every once in a while, a Republican gets in there and wins, and then they want to abolish the Electoral College. But let me just say this, and this is why I think it's a bad idea. If you do all the numbers, she won, Hillary Clinton won by 2.9 million votes, and she won in California by 4.3 million votes. So, therefore, his bill would say, well, we don't need to go to all the states. We'll just go to Los Angeles is 80% of the vote. We'll just go to Hollywood and let them decide who our president's going to be. I don't think that's a good system.
All right, Barry, what would you say?
Well, first of all, if we're going to look at this from an originalist point of view, if we want to go back to that, I don't know if my Republican colleague does, we didn't let women vote. We didn't let blacks vote. We didn't let non-landowners vote. And we counted blacks as 3/5 of a person. So we had mechanisms to change as we evolved, and we realized we were wrong. So that's number one. Number two, this is not good for America, but it's not just bad for California, it's bad for all these states, the flyover states that you guys are trying to say it's good for. When's the last time you heard anybody talk about the poverty in Mississippi, which is the #1 state for poverty in the country, the highest poverty for whites and blacks? Nobody does because no presidential candidate went there. These aren't ghost campaigns. We know where every presidential candidate goes, and Barack Obama in 2012 after the nomination went to 8 states. So he ignored everybody else. So anything is better than nothing. This helps the flyover states, this helps the small states, and we can also look at, by the way, this is a good book on why the Electoral College is bad for America by Dr. Edwards, my older brother, who teaches at Oxford. You can look at this and see that states that have governors, that have population centers that are like Wisconsin, they have to go beyond the big urban areas. You have to go to the rural areas. This makes every American vote equally worthwhile. It's a good thing to do. We need to move on. And the Democrats didn't do this, by the way, just as a quick closure, because they thought they were going to lose. Every one of those states that signed on to the compact, we're at 165 of the 270 we need, did so by 2014. These were the most Democratic states that did so because it was the right reason to do, because your colleagues told me that there was a blue wall.
All right, so no, would this turn it into a national campaign? As Barry said, I think the last time around 12 states were in play, but still that means that the other 38 were not in play.
The states. I'm not convinced that it will ever get a presidential candidate to go to a rural state. I mean, what's the point of going to Mississippi when you go to the city of Los Angeles and talk to just as many people with a third of the trouble? You can do it in an hour. Yeah. Mississippi, you're going to have to travel the entire state for a month to try and touch everybody. The president will no longer campaign in states like Iowa and some of these flyover states that they do once in a while go visit if it's a swing state. You have a president going to New Mexico, you will never have a presidential candidate go to New Mexico again. But first and foremost, I have to point out, with all due respect to your client, this is a political stunt. Darrell Rouson is very good at working with Republicans when he wants to. He didn't try on this. It was a press release. And that's the last we will hear of it.
Last we hear of it?
I think that's wrong. But let's look, as far as states, you can look at like in Milwaukee is the big population center in Wisconsin. But the governor has to campaign in smaller areas to pick up their vote. Every vote becomes as critical. So you don't just go to Los Angeles. You go to New Mexico. You go to every state. You can compare Texas, these places, to big urban centers, and look at it mathematically.
All right. So, Mark, do you think there's a political stunt and this is the last we're going to hear of it?
Absolutely. There's no way that's going to pass the Republican legislature. And again, it's a federal issue, not a
We're starting the conversation. It was a Republican National Committee that last year wanted Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Indiana, and perhaps even Florida to change the way they apportion votes to buy their congressional district.
Look what Trump did, though. He went and campaigned in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, places that Republicans, quote, don't have to campaign. So it really forced him out into those areas as well.
All right. Well, over the holidays, some of Florida's top scientists sent a letter to President-elect Trump at his Palm Beach mansion requesting a meeting. The scientists say that they're gravely concerned about the impact of sea level rise on Florida. They added that many of Florida's waterfront properties are vulnerable to even minor increases in sea level because of erosion and storm surge, and that the effects are already being felt. A recent Bloomberg report said that even Trump's estate could be underwater in coming years because of man-made climate change. The scientists, though, did not get their meeting. Meantime, a new report released by the City of Tampa and the Hillsborough County Planning Commission said that many low-lying areas in the city and county could be in trouble as sea levels rise over the next 23 years. The projected rise is anywhere from 5 inches to almost 1.5 feet. Areas near Old Tampa Bay, MacDill Air Force Base, McKay Bay, the Tampa Bypass Canal, and along the Hillsborough River could be the most vulnerable if sea level rise is not mitigated. Also at risk are 30 local parks, including Curtis Hickson, and the local infrastructure and roads that are already within flood-prone areas. And Tampa General Hospital on Davis Islands is particularly vulnerable because of its location along the water. All right, so Barry, even if the scientists met with Donald Trump, do you think they would have convinced him?
Unfortunately, people can question the resolve that we had with President Obama. But when people met with him and he was presented with facts, he accepted the facts. He has, as he agreed.
You're talking about President Obama.
President Obama. As Pat Moynihan said, the great senator from New York, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own set of facts. And that's the problem we have with President-elect Trump. He doesn't accept the facts. There's no scientist that's reputable, that's had peer review, that disagrees that we have climate change and rising sea levels. And even if you say the climate change isn't man-made, we know that there's rising sea level, and they're causing problems for Florida. So Trump and all these guys need to get on board and quit the political posturing.
No, I just want to follow up that yeah, we've always had climate change. We used to have it was an ice age, the whole place. So, but that wasn't created by cars. And we also, the other thing is we need to look at some of the other things, the international aspects of this. So I was in China a couple of years ago, and the hotel, you couldn't even see the top floor because of the pollution. So assuming that we do stuff here, this has to become a global effort.
And President Obama signed a massive climate change bill last year, which the Chinese came on board with. And he had, 170 of the 187 countries or whatever are signatories. So we have this massive international effort now. And you're right, because when you go to China, a lot of people are wearing masks. Especially
Anastasia, let me bring you in.
Winter.
There are areas right around here in the Bay Area, especially in Tampa and in Hillsborough County, that are chronically flooding when we have the summer rains. And also, those are the areas that were identified by the Hillsborough County Planning Commission as being most vulnerable as the sea levels rise.
And I think, regardless of whether you believe that this is a man-made phenomenon or this is just, the way of the world, the fact is that Bayshore floods every time it rains, and the wetlands have been replaced with concrete jungles, and that's just how it's going to be. I think that Trump would be wise to listen to the people who voted for him.
And there are hundreds of billions of dollars of coastline property that are in danger, even if the sea levels rise, 5 inches or 1.5 feet.
And I think Trump, the businessman, knows that. He's always going to be pro-manufacturing. He's always going to, work to have more businesses come in. So it would be a wise investment.
Mark, what about that? I mean, the whether or not climate change is happening aside, because we realize that a lot of Republicans don't accept that, but would you agree that sea levels are rising?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. And let me also say, as chairman of the Hillsborough Soil and Water Conservation District, we look at those issues, and one of the things we need to do is we need to find ways to not retention, but ways to have proper drainage and be able to reclaim a lot of that water. So I think there's some infrastructure needs.
And that means money. That means spending money on infrastructure and drainage, right?
And I'd be in favor of that if it was, to conserve our water.
All right. Well, before we go, what other news stories should we be paying attention to? Mark Proctor, let's start with you.
Well, I'm hearing rumors. I'm hearing all kinds of, so it's not news, but I think it may be that Pam Bondi may soon be leaving the state as the Attorney General and going to the Trump administration. As recently as yesterday, I think Barry may even have been there, or when she had her press conference, she was at today, and she was asked. She's not making any comments. She's very silent on the issue. So that may impact us if Pam Bondi goes to Washington. Maybe the governor replaced her with Mark Ober or somebody like that. So who knows?
So Mark Ober is the new Attorney General of Florida?
Yeah, just maybe as an interim.
How about that? All right, Anastasia, you're the big story.
Well, anybody who's been in downtown Tampa for the past month knows that the college football playoff championship is here. Downtown is basically a fortress, so there's a lot to look for security. This is also kind of a debut for the Riverwalk area and some of these other, different infrastructure projects that Buckhorn has put in. So it'll be nice to see if that helps elevate the Tampa area into a premier, venue.
Have you gotten any feedback from the tourists who are in town for the college football championship?
So far, so good. Everyone's having a great time. There are lots of events that will let people experience the whole thing for free. The real question is going to be what Tampa gets out of it, out of giving out all these freebies.
Okay. Barry, your other big story.
Yesterday, Rick Kreisman, the mayor of St. Petersburg, announced for re-election for another term. And so that starts the clock for Rick Baker. And I think Rick Baker has 50 days. I think he has to March 1st to decide in a city, being out of office for 8 years, to get in if he's going to be credible and try to win. But it also...
Why does he have 50 days?
I think if you wait past March 1st, I think that by that time Kreisman will have solidified everything if he waits till April or May.
And the election's this November.
The primary's in September, and then the runoff, unless somebody got 50%, because it's citywide, in the primary is in November.
What about Bill Foster getting back in, the former mayor?
I think the threat to Kreisman is Rick Baker, but if Rick Baker, which has kind of got a reputation lately as Hamlet on Tampa Bay, to be or not to be, or to run to not to run, if he waits past that, what he's doing is he's locking out the Bill Fosters, he's locking out the other Republicans. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to make a quick decision, because if he waits to March or April and no other Republican can get in, no other Republican has a name ID or infrastructure built in to be able to take out someone as strong as Kreisman.
Has Kreisman surpassed, has he overcome his sewage release problems?
He's on the way. I got people all around me that are going to attack me. I support Rick Kreisman, and I think he's doing a good job, and he will get past that.
All right, Noah, you're on the big story.
Anastasia teed me up so well. The College Football Championship in town, we did a story on 10 Investigates this week, tearing apart local economic impact reports. Basically, they're all bull. We called on our politicians to stop using them in meetings, to stop even looking at them, because there's no economist who would actually stand behind these reports. $300 million in the economy from this one game this week, $400 million from the RNC, when we know that it actually hurt probably Tampa's local economy back in 2012. And I mean, we went case by case, blowing all these economic impact reports up. We even brought a 4-year-old in to give a message to our politicians, because they just can't understand it. So that's on my Facebook page, Noah Pransky.
Do we give a big subsidy when these games come in?
It's about $10 million local spending, we estimate, at least, for this one weekend game. This weekend is going to bring people into town, heads in beds. It's going to bring the locals out doing stuff. So this football game may possibly return on its investment. We'll never know, though, because no one wants to actually take an economist look at it.
All right. Well, thank you all for a great show. And thank you for watching Florida This Week. Your comments are always welcome. Please write us at ftw@wedu.org. This and past programs can be seen at our website, wedu.org. And please join us again next Friday night at 8:30 and Sunday afternoon at 12:30. And from all of us here at WEDU, have a great weekend.
Florida This Week is a production of WEDU, who is solely responsible for its content.